Hey everyone, this is Rob with Drones in the Wild, and I recently made a video at Baker Lake at a variety of locations around that area, and you know what? I really discovered that in the Baker-Snoqualmie National Forest, and specifically around Mount Baker, there's an entire world to discover. So I'm actually kind of following up on one area that I saw, and that's Boulder Creek. Now, before I flew from the road, the actual Baker Lake Road, this time I actually drove up the rather unpaved and ruddy National Forest Road up to the Boulder Ridge trailhead. And actually what you're looking at here is Boulder Ridge looking towards Mount Baker. To the left is sort of the little valley cut by Boulder Creek. And, you really come to realize, if you take advantage of a lot of these little national forest roads, there's a lot of trails there. There's a lot of places to see. And it's a way of getting the drone to a new spot, to get it up higher. And you can get some views that you couldn't have gotten down by the road. Look at this, you can see this sort of slide, this rock slide that goes down towards Boulder Creek. I never would have seen that flying from the road, because actually to go from Baker Lake Road to fly up the creek, even though it's relatively straight, you're going to be out of range and lose signal. You're going to see later in this video that I actually did do some flying down from the road, but just sort of give a context of where I was, and actually the lighting conditions were better than when I was there before too. But really amazing stuff. Now you see this sort of open area on the side of that other ridge that we're flying towards. Originally, I was actually going to follow a national forest road up to the top of that and actually launch from the edge of that little precipice there. Unfortunately, that national forest road was closed. So coming up to the Boulder Ridge trailhead was actually my second choice, but I ended up being pretty happy with it. Here we are flying over the little valley. Interestingly, I'm pretty high above the creek, but actually not very high above the launch position. I'm actually kind of in between two peaks here. So technically, yes, at this moment I am above 400 feet AGL. However, I got a lot of obstacles around here, and it is every airman's right to avoid obstacles. You can see I'm coming back up over. That's actually a nice view of the ridge there, heading up towards the mountain. It's actually not one of the most common routes to summit Mount Baker, but it is one of the more known routes to go all the way up to the peak. You definitely have to be a skilled alpinist for things like that, though. This is a national forest, and one of the nice things about national forest, now that's actually looking north along Baker Lake, so actually at the very northern end, I flew there last time. But anyway, getting back, national forests are one of the few large open wilderness areas that are pretty much unrestricted for drones. And in fact, the only areas within national forests that do have drone restrictions are the ski areas. I think that was like a knee-jerk reaction to that cameraman drone crashing into the skier last year. But that's the only place that's unrestricted for drones, and it makes sense. A national forest is not a pristine park like a national park or a national monument. And in fact, is not actually run by the National Park Service, it's run by the Forest Service. But it is an economically exploited area. That means there's logging that goes on in there. You also have things like hunting and snowmobiling and off-roading. So I don't really foresee drones ever being restricted in places like these, because if you're going to restrict drones, why are you allowing all kinds of far noisier and environmentally intrusive activities? Here we are, kind of going back over the valley. You can see here, this is where Boulder Creek flows into Baker Lake. So, and if you really break out your eagle eye, you can see where Baker Lake Road crosses Boulder Creek. We'll be down there in a little bit. I'm actually flying right about launch altitude here. I'm actually further, maybe even below launch altitude on this pass here, because I'm at the trailhead parking lot, and that's fairly high up on that ridge, and now I'm getting down below getting actually not too far above that rock slide there. Now this video was done in the morning, unlike some of the previous videos where I actually flew and filmed near dawn. Dawn time, especially with a Phantom drone, it is a nice little camera for what it is, but it is fairly lacking in the dynamic range category. And I have found that it struggles at times of day like dawn, where you need as much dynamic range as you can get. So I waited a little bit later in the day. It is still, you can see the shadows on the trees. The sun is not up at its peak. But, and to be honest, I wanted to get there before most of the crowds, although it turns out I really got there ahead of the crowds. In fact, I didn't really see a lot of traffic until I was leaving. You can see that little dirt road there. That's actually the Forest Service road going up to the Boulder Ridge trailhead. I've got a little crossover SUV. It actually managed it pretty well. I used to have a Mustang, and there's no way that's driven up there. I really can't get enough of Mount Baker and the views of it. I live way to the south, outside of Seattle, and on a nice day you can see Mount Baker plain as day from that far south. It is what's called a stratovolcano, and there are 4 main ones in Washington State: that Mount Baker, Mount Rainier, Mount Adams, and Mount St. Helens, and they all rise well above the surrounding mountains, so they really stick out like a sore thumb and can be seen from a long way away. I mean, a lot of those famous photos you see of Seattle and you've got Mount Rainier in the background, well, that mountain's pretty far away. It just happens to rise way above the surrounding terrain, as does Mount Baker up to the north, and then Mount St. Helens is actually down closer to Portland, and Mount Adams is east of Mount Rainier. So these 4 mountains, they generally stick way above the surrounding terrain, and they'll be snowy and glaciered year-round. Now this slide you see here, this is actually on the other side of Boulder Creek and actually further downstream. I actually didn't even know this thing existed, or hadn't actually seen it, at least. I had seen it in Google Satellite, but hadn't actually seen it until I did this drone flight. You can see it kind of is around a corner from the areas downstream. Here we are flying a little bit lower. I actually found there's a little hairpin curve on the Forest Service Road going up to Boulder Ridge Trailhead that had a little pull-off, and it wasn't a huge opening, but it was definitely good enough for the Phantom. And it actually allowed me to get a little bit closer to this rock slide here, and at a little bit lower altitude, and to get some more flying in just get a different perspective. Yeah, nice little zoom over the ridge line here. That large mountain to the left is Mount Shucksan, which, if you go to the Mount Baker ski area, which is on the north side of the mountain, or all the extensive trails, which, believe me, I do plan to fly up there at some point, that mountain becomes very prominent when you're up there. Here we are. This is actually that second rock slide, which is further downstream. And then this is the larger one that's upstream on the southwest side of the creek. I do find Boulder Creek to be pretty fascinating, and this is why. Because this is what initially drew me to it. It's one of the few spots which gives you a really clear view from almost down by the lake, because Boulder Creek just goes straight up towards Mount Baker. And it's one of those, I always bring photographic gear with me, and it's one of those places that I just, even though I've taken the picture a million times before, lighting conditions might be a little different. I might try some different shutter speed settings to get, different effects on the water. I swear every time I come to this area, I stop here and take pictures of Mount Baker. We're going to travel up the creek really as far as we can, as far as radio signal allows us. And this will be a little further than we did on the last video, so you're going to get quite a bit more of the more views of the creek. Now you'll notice it always seems like the drone wants to get lower and lower until it's about to hit the ground. That's actually because it's an uphill gradient going towards the mountain. The drone is pretty much going level. It is actually dropping a little bit. You can see it visually. But really the biggest impact is the fact that the terrain is actually going up, and that the water is, as you can see, flowing down. And one of those things that, one thing I will say, with this, in this particular location, this low, in this little valley, it did have trouble getting GPS lock. So I'm actually, most of the time that I'm flying in this low altitude, I'm actually getting the safe to fly non-GPS. You can see here I'm actually rising up, and that's because I was starting to lose the light bridge signal, so I decided, hey, I'll just climb up and get a better signal. And actually, almost as soon as I started climbing up here, it went green again, and it was safe to fly GPS. So I think it was having trouble acquiring all the satellites that it wanted to acquire when it was down that low in the little valley. It didn't really seem to affect the flying of the drone too much, although I was flying fairly low, so for all I know, it might have been using the vision positioning system. And here we are heading back downstream. We got some short lighting here because it is still morning time and the sun is, we're almost heading into the sun. The sun's actually a little off to the right. But definitely gives a different look to the water because the water is reflecting all that light right at you in this angle. And actually it's kind of neat because you can see all the little channels and stuff that aren't quite as visible when you got the sun behind you. I'm actually right on I'm not sure if I can see myself. I remember those cars driving right behind me. Oh yeah, I see myself now. I'm a little speck on that walkway on the bridge. Yeah, right there on the left side. And now we're going to continue downstream and head towards Baker Lake. Once again, this is really going to be, how far I can go is really based on radio range. Going to do something a little different. I was making basically straight legs going upstream. I'm actually going to just use the yaw and steer my way down the river for a ways. Baker Lake is a man-made reservoir. The water level is definitely higher than it was last time I was here. When I was here last time, you could see very large mud flats. In fact, on my last trip up here, actually the last two trips, I took little forays on the foot out onto these mud flats and took some pretty interesting pictures because when they were basically building this reservoir and before they filled it up, they actually had to chop down a lot of trees. So the bottom of the reservoir is just covered with tree stumps. And when the water level is lowered for the winter, a lot of these mud flats just littered with tree stumps are then visible. Well, as we head back towards the launch position for my fourth flight that comprised making this video, just want to thank you for watching, and if you haven't, please subscribe, and we'll be coming at you with some more videos from Washington State. Thanks.